can your posture be fixed? How do you fix posture? What are the advantages and disadvantages of posture correctors or braces? And what are ideal postures for sitting, standing, walking, running? These are common questions that I get asked, and these are the ones that we're going to be looking at during this tutorial. I'm going to timestamp each part of it as we go, but it is going to be sort of a congruent conversation about posture. So I'm going to be talking about what we've talked about previous. So if you go to one of the later questions, then you might have missed something that I'm talking about earlier and you might not quite understand where I am. So it's ideal to listen to the whole thing, but if you want to listen to different parts of it, then you can do that. So the first question is, can posture be fixed, first of all? And I want to say, yes, it can. When we talk about can it be fixed, it most certainly can. It just depends how we get there, which is then the second question, is how do we do that? So if I'm saying it can be fixed, okay, well, how do we get there? So how do I fix posture? Well, it's not necessarily down to, let's just say, the standard information of you need to stretch a certain muscle and then you need to strengthen its opposite muscle. It's not necessarily as simple as that, because what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you a little bit about how the body works, which will then highlight how you go about correcting it. So I'm not sort of making up how you do it. I'm basing it on the way the body likes to work, if that makes sense. So how we can sort of begin to understand this is, number one, how do we sort of end up in bad posture? Well, as a general rule, it will be learned. It will be learned over days, weeks, months, and years. So if we can learn bad posture, then we can learn good posture. So it's just a case of taking that into consideration. What we also have to understand with that is, how long has it taken us to learn the bad posture? Well, again, it's taken us days, weeks, months, and years. So then, how long is it going to take for us to overcome that bad posture and learn new posture? Well, potentially, it's going to take us days, weeks, months, and years. So it's not something that we can just go, right, I'm going to focus on this for 3 months. It would certainly improve and you'll see the benefits, but you may not get all the way that you want to get. And the reason for that is that every time you go into a bad posture, you reinforce the posture. Now, you reinforce the posture up in the brain. This is where it's stored. So you can liken all of your positions, your postures, and your movements as habits. And every time you perform them, or one of them, poorly, the body remembers that and it sort of lays it down and reinforces that. Now, what we have to do when we're learning bad posture is we not only have to build up the learning of the good posture, but it has to override the bad posture. So it's only at that point as when the body has learnt that new good posture, does it, in some respects, sort of set itself in. It's doing it all the time as it's improving, and then eventually it will get there. But it will kind of sneak up on you when you haven't realised, or you'll be doing something and you'll think, oh my God, 5 years ago when I did this same thing, I was in much worse posture and now I'm in a much better posture. I hadn't realised the process. So that's kind of how it would work. Some of the things that we need to be able to, or essentially the process of doing it is a 3-step process. Now, I use the labels of massage, stretch and move. Now I'm going to explain what each of those labels are. Other people may use different labels for it, so on and so forth, but essentially these 3 principles will hold throughout most of what people say. So with regards to the massage part of it, is when we're talking about poor posture, we'll have stiffness through a muscle or a set of tissues. Muscles, fascia. When I say tissues, I mean muscles, fascia, ligaments, and tendons. So we'll have stiffness through there. So what we need to do is we need to loosen it. So if we take that stiff tissue, like a piece of chewing gum, when you take it straight out of the wrapper, it's very stiff and it doesn't move very well. But when we go about chewing that chewing gum, and then we take it out after a minute or two, it's much more pliable. We can stretch it and move it in the way that we want it to. So that's what we're using the massage for. Now, this could be like a regular massage that you know about, where you lie on a couch and someone massages you. But again, what we have to do, it has to be the muscles that we need massaged. It's not just go for a massage and you'll be, you will be making yourself more pliable. But we need, if we're talking about posture, we need to think about specific tissues in specific positions. So it needs to be quite a specific type of massage. Now, we can also use self-massage. That could be with your own thumb, with your fists, with your knuckles. It could be with a foam roller. It could be with like an orb ball or sort of a hard ball, sort of the size of this. It could be with a tennis ball, a lacrosse ball, cricket ball, hockey ball, golf ball, so on and so forth. But it's using some type of tool to be able to move the muscles so they become more pliable. Once we can do that, we can then move on to the stretching part of it. Now, when we come on to the stretching part of it, what we are talking about is static stretching, PNF stretching, which is like stretching in intervals. You've got, there's loads of different types of stretching out there. So basically, stretching. I'm not necessarily too fussed about what type of stretching, but stretch the muscles. A lot of people talk about normal static stretching and how it makes the stretch reflex become more sensitive, and essentially it makes the muscle tighter because you stretch it and it pings back. There's a certain environment in which that will happen, which I will explain in a second. But static stretching is fine, so don't worry too much about all the different opinions about, oh no, you shouldn't just static stretch for 30 seconds. It's fine. In the years of experience that I've been, I began doing this in 2008, which from the recording is 12 years. I've never had someone that I've done static stretching with, either at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the session, become tighter over a prolonged period of time. They've either maintained their flexibility or it's improved. So that's kind of where that argument falls down, but I'll explain where the argument comes from in a second. So once we've massaged, we've stretched. Now the stretch is there to try and get a little bit of more length out of the pliability that we've created in the step before. So once we've stretched, it can move a little bit longer. So what we've done there is we've created more space for our joints to move, because when we talk about changing posture, it's generally a muscular problem. But as I've explained, because it's learned up here, it's a sort of a neuromuscular connection between the brain and the muscle. So what we have to do is we have to teach the body and teach the brain about these new positions and that they can get into. So we've made the joint be able to move by making the muscle more pliable. We've then stretched it a little bit so it could stretch a little bit further or move a little bit further than it did before. What we then need to do is use specific types of movement, and that could just be certain exercises but done in a specific way. We then need to use the movement that we've just created, because when we stretch, we know we've got about 15, 20, 25, even 30 minutes of a window to be able to use it before it starts to come back to the way it was. Now, when we are creating that space and we are using it, that is the point at which the brain is starting to read it and learn this new posture, because it's a new stimulus, because it hasn't been in that position for a very long time. So as it goes into that position, it thinks, oh, this is new. I need to start laying this down as a pattern of movement or a posture or whatever. So it then starts to lay it down, but we need to keep repeating it for it to become strong, for it to override the poor posture that we have. So we need to think of it like that. So that's essentially the 3 steps: massage, stretch, move. There's one thing, or there's a few things, but I'm going to be talking about one that we need to be doing throughout these 3 steps, and that's breathing. And the reason we need to use our breathing is because breathing relaxes the body and it relaxes the tissues of the body. We've got 2 sides to the nervous system. One's called the sympathetic side, which is fight or flight. So fight, we go towards it. Flight, we move away from it. So we either go towards or away from the stressor. When we go on to the other side of the nervous system, it's known as the parasympathetic, which is the relaxation side. So this is the side that relaxes the tissues. So if we use massage, stretch, move, but we're doing it and we're all tight and stressed and then that's not relaxing the tissues, which then affects how pliable they can become, how much we can stretch them, and then how much we can move them. So we need to think about that. So we need to breathe, which then relaxes the tissues, which relaxes the brain, and allows it to get the most from the massage, the stretching, and the movement. And with regards to the stretch reflex that I talked about, when people say don't do static stretching, if you are in a stressful position and you try and stretch a muscle, because the sympathetic side, when you're stressed, is trying to tighten everything up, if you stretch it, it's going to try and ping back. But when you're relaxed, you relax the stretch reflex to be able to allow it to move out, because the tissue is relaxing, because the neuromuscular connection isn't trying to fire it when it doesn't want to fire. So what you're doing is you're creating that environment to be able to stretch the muscle and then use what you've just stretched to be able to improve the posture that you want to move into. So first of all, we've got the 3 steps. Then we've got to be able to keep the breathing relaxed, which basically means breathe through the nose and breathe from the abdomen. If we can do that, we'll start to relax the tissues, which will help us get more from the massage, the stretching, and the movement. Now, we apply that by massaging and relaxing the breathing. Now, as we stretch, as you get to a challenging part of the stretch, what most people will tend to do is they'll tend to hold their breath. So what we need to do is, when we get into that challenging sort of end range of a stretch, we need to focus on our breathing and keep it relaxed. That will then help the brain and the body learn that it's okay to lengthen that muscle, because muscles generally become tight because they perceive stress and they try to protect, hence they go tight. But if we can sort of put a metaphorical arm around the body and say that's okay by using our breathing, the body will relax, the muscle will relax, and it will start to open out. And then when we go into the movement, we use it for the same principle, because when we get into a challenging movement, we will tend to hold our breath. That will send us to the sympathetic side and everything will start to tighten up. When we relax the breathing in a challenging position, we use that position that we've created, we relax the breathing, and then the body is allowed to learn it because it's not fighting it, because it's trying to initiate the stress response. So we're sort of acting like we are trying to relax things, but actually our body is trying to pull us to the stress response, which is to tighten everything up. So by using breathing, we can relax that all the way through the system, the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, the fascia, and also up into the through the nerve and up into the brain as well. So that's when we start to learn those postures and positions, and then it's just a case of repeating that. So whenever I'm coaching someone, it's a lot of information to take in for something that seems so simple, or that we've been told is so simple. It's just, just go and do some stretches, just strengthen your back muscles and stretch your pecs if you want to stand up straight. It's not as simple as that. There's all these steps that go in, or these 3 steps that go into place that need to be used, or breathing needs to be used within them in a very specific way to be able to get us there. So that's, in a sense, a sort of an overview of how we would go about changing posture, or fixing posture if you want to call it that. Now that's going to be specific, or that's going to be different for everyone, but the guidelines and the principles will stay the same. But everyone will want to, change their posture differently for each individual. So we need to understand it like that, and that's where the specific nature of changing posture comes in. Now, the question about back braces and or it's not back braces, posture braces or posture correctors. How useful are they? Well, what we have to understand is what I've just talked about is your body learning the process. So it's learning good posture. If we use a brace that pulls your shoulders back, then your body's not learning that. It's just being forced into a position and held there. The muscles aren't actively learning, or the tissues aren't actively learning, which is then taking away the active learning that's going on in the brain. So what we have to do is, you can use them. If it's helpful initially, then use it. Because whenever we cut ourselves, we might put a plaster over it, which is a useful thing to do in the short term. But we can't leave the plaster on full time because of the healing that takes place. It needs air, it needs moisture, so on and so forth. It doesn't just want to sit in its own sweat effectively. So eventually the plaster comes off. So that's essentially how we need to think about those posture correctors. For specific scenarios, for specific movements, initially they can be useful to help us just sort of maybe learn, or okay, this is the position I need to be in and this is what it feels like. There, it's fine. Use a posture corrector because it helps us learn that. But we have to use those 3 steps, and we can't rely on the posture corrector to do the job for us. We have to actively learn consciously, and then the brain starts to do it, and then we don't even need the posture corrector, further down the line. And that goes for back braces and also insoles in shoes as well. It's not something that's to be relied on, because you're taking away the learning that the body wants to do and can do, and just giving it, essentially you're just giving it, you're masking the problem essentially by using a brace or a corrector of some kind. So what we can now do is we can now look at the sort of 3 or 4 different postures that I've talked about. We've got a sitting posture, we've got a standing posture, and then we've got sort of a locomotion posture, i.e. walking and running. Now, when we talk about sitting posture, so I'll do this in isolation for the purposes of the timestamps. When we talk about sitting posture, well, what we generally think about is someone that's sat in a seat, they're sat right back in the seat, they've got a straight line, so they're bolt upright, straight line from hips to shoulder, and a straight line from shoulder up to the ear, so they're upright. They've also got feet flat on the floor, feet are sort of hip width apart, arms are on a arm rests, and sort of shoulders are relaxed, so on and so forth. Now, as a general rule, that's fine. That's the model that we want to start from. It's not necessarily the model that we want to use, and the reason we don't necessarily want to use it as something to help us understand how to sit is for the very reason that our body is built to move. So when we move, what we are doing is we are dispersing stresses across the body, across different joints and across different tissues. When we stand still or sit still, we are concentrating them onto specific areas of the body. Now, our body doesn't like that, because then it starts to create aches and pains, which is why in so many people, when they start moving, it starts to relieve those aches and those pains, because those stresses are being moved around the body. So if we've got 100% stress going in one area when we're sat still, when we start to move, it might start and spread it over 10 areas. So we've got 10% of stress spread all over the body, if that makes sense. And that's kind of an analogy or a metaphor. So very simple things we can do: sit back, sit forward, sit to the right, sit to the left, change the position of the feet, bring them wider, bring them narrower, put 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, sit to the back of the seat, sit to the forward of or the front of the seat. So all the time we are changing the posture. We're just spreading the load across the body. If we stay in that one position and we start to create aches and pains, what will start to happen is our body will start to move, change posture to try and manage that stress and that pressure that's in the body. So we will start changing the posture. Our body will do that unconsciously. So what we are trying to do is using the principles of that seating posture of straight lines, essentially, is we can use that, but as we move. So we aren't sort of going into that position, but we might go into that position to the right. So we've still got a relaxed shoulder. We've still got a straight line from our hip to our shoulder. We've still got a straight line from our shoulder to our ear, but we're just leaning to the right ever so slightly. And then we could do the same to the left, same as we lean back, same as we lean forward. So it's about using that model, that upright stationary model, as a metaphor or as a starting point or as a point of reference to be able to use as a principle. But essentially, we've got to keep moving. Now, again, when we're sitting, we want to be upright. We want the pelvis to be neutral and the spine to be upright. We want the hips to be at roughly 90 degrees, but it's not a problem if we change that. because we're spreading the load. If we then move it into standing, it's the same idea that we want the upright posture. We want the shoulders back. We want the head up and in line. We want the feet roughly hip width apart. That's let's just say, the position where stress is minimized, but it's still there. So what we need to be able to do, again, is move. Now, that doesn't mean, certainly when we're sitting, we can get up and move around. That will help. That will help spread those stresses from what that stationary posture is creating. And it's exactly the same with standing. So we need to be able to move around as we're stood still. So shift the weight onto the right, shift the weight onto the left, split the stance, widen the stance. So split the stance, one foot in front of the other, and then change that position. So what we are doing is we are spreading those loads. If we can lean on something, lean on it. If you can lean forward on something, lean on it. But maintaining neutral posture through the hips, what is essentially what would be described as a neutral spine, keeping the head in line, so on and so forth. But again, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of movement of the head, a little bit of rotation of the spine, which we'll come on to when we talk about walking and running. So it's not about being in that stuck stationary position 24/7, because the body doesn't like that. The body likes to move, but there are principles of posture where the body prefers to be as we are moving. So it's not about just being rigid as we move. We can be flexible, we can move the spine, we can move the head, we can move the shoulders, the hips, the knees, the feet, and all that kind of stuff. But if we do it too much in the wrong position, then that's going to create a problem in itself. So there's sort of a happy medium or a balance that we're trying to create with good posture and bad posture, and that continuum of good posture to bad posture. So it's not trying to be in bad posture for a prolonged period of time, but be in good posture and moving around in those good postures. Now, when we look at walking and running, we are starting to talk about movement. Now, again, what most people think is that we need to maintain these straight lines, but walking is quite a dynamic, or walking and running is quite a dynamic movement. Everyone knows about what the legs and the feet are doing whilst we walk. They're moving back and forth. One swings through, strikes the floor, then you go into the stance phase, and then the toe off phase, and the whole thing starts again. So that's something that we want to be aware of. But also something that we want to be aware of is being upright, keeping the breathing relatively relaxed, but also swinging the arms, because what swinging the arms does is it creates momentum, and it creates rotation through the upper spine. As we do that, that contributes to the arm swing, and that also that momentum contributes to the leg swing as well. So we would talk about walking at a slightly faster pace to be able to maintain that. When we amble along in a very slow walk, it allows, or gives the body more of an opportunity to sort of crumble into a poorer posture. The legs don't move quite as much. The arms aren't moving quite as much. And then what starts to happen is we start to sort of clump our way through walking. Bump, 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 so on and so forth. And what that's doing, that's creating extra pressure on joints, because muscles or other tissues aren't functioning quite as effectively as they could. When we walk a little bit faster, our posture comes up, our arms start to move, our legs start to move a little bit faster. And when we hit the floor, we get what's called a ground reaction force. And those forces stimulate more muscles. They stimulate more muscles around the foot and the ankle, which then are allowed to spread those stresses and forces around the joints much more effectively. Every time our foot hits the floor during walking, it's about 3 times body weight. And every time it does it with running, it can be anywhere from like 5 to 10 times body weight. So it's a lot of stress that goes through the body during those times. So what we are trying to do is be in that good posture, so the muscles come online, so they're able to actively control what the body's doing a little bit more and spread the stresses around the body a little bit more, which is going to keep you away from poorer postures as your muscles start to tighten. The final thing that we then need to do within all three of these that I've talked about is build the endurance of that. So I've alluded to it with the walking and the running, that as we start to slow down and amble, we'll start to go into a poorer posture. So what we need to be able to do is maintain that endurance and that integrity, or that maintain that good posture and integrity over a prolonged period of time, which is the endurance. So we need to build that capacity. So again, as I mentioned about fixing the posture and the repetition of being in the position, we need to be able to do that over a prolonged period of time. So if we go out for a 5-minute walk, we can maintain that good posture, that pace. Now that doesn't mean we've got to maintain the pace all the way through. It could be speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. So we're able to build that endurance in maybe 5-minute blocks. And then that turns into a half an hour walk where we've stayed in a relatively good posture for 5 minutes, and then a 2-minute break, then 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, so on and so forth. So it's not just a case of going and doing a few token stretches, is what I'm trying to say with how we go about fixing posture. We need to use that 3-step process of massage, stretch, move. That needs to include our breathing. So we relax the nervous system, we relax the tissues of the body so we can go into those better postures. When it comes to then sitting, standing, walking and running, we need to be able to be in those good postures that we've created from the 3 steps. And then we need to build the endurance of that. And we need to be able to move and mold our posture and position to distribute loads so the body doesn't create tightness to protect itself from poorer postures. So that is my sort of 30 minutes or so on how to go about correcting posture. Been a lot of obviously talking about it. It's now just a case of going into the gym. There is stuff on the YouTube channel which talks about that, so you can go and find that. Obviously I will be producing more over time. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Hole Training. I will speak to you in the next tutorial.